Good evening. How's everybody doing tonight? Good. So as you can see, I know I am not Pastor Joe. You don't get him tonight, you get me. But we are going to stick with his lesson in the names of God, and we're going to continue that. And there are papers in the back, if there's still some, if you want the fill-in papers. So hopefully I can facilitate this well in the way that he wanted and meant for it, and the way the Holy Spirit means for it, because I know I'm not him, and I'm sorry. So let's just go ahead. I like to start off in prayer. It calms my nerves. So to pray and get things started. So Holy Spirit, we just welcome you in this place tonight. We know that you're already here, that you've come with each and every one of us. And we just thank you for everything that you want to do in this place tonight. We thank you for the wisdom and the knowledge that you want to give to us tonight. And we just ask that ears be open to hear the words that you have for them, hearts be open to receive, and eyes open in this place tonight to see the things that you have for us. And Lord, just let everything come out the way that you want and the way that you will in this place tonight. In Jesus' name, amen. So we do have slides too. And I'm not as organized. I do like to be organized. I'm just not good at it. So I'm going to try. There was a time in my life I really loved to be organized and controlled. And then somewhere along the line, that just went far away from me. Yes. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. The Lord will see to it. So that's the next name that we're talking about, Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide, the Lord will see to it. And the first time that we hear this is Genesis 22. And I'm going to go ahead and read it. It's 22, 1 through 19. I'm going to try not to read too much, but I know we always assume that everybody knows these stories, but I don't want to ever assume that everybody just knows the story. So we'll take a few minutes to read through before we get started. And this is talking about Abraham and the sacrifice of Isaac. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, "Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and go to the land of Moriah, and offer him there as a burnt offering on one of the mountains of which I shall tell you." So Abraham rose early in the morning, saddled his donkey, and took 2 of his young men with him, and his son Isaac. And he cut the wood for the burnt offering, and arose and went to the place of which God had told him. On the 3rd day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and saw the place from afar. Then Abraham said to his young men, "Stay here with the donkey. I and the boy will go over there and worship and come again to you." And Abraham took the wood of the burnt offering and laid it on Isaac his son. And he took in his hand the fire and the knife. So they went both of them together. And Isaac said to his father Abraham, "My father." And he said, "Here I am, my son." He said, "Behold the fire and the wood, but where is the lamb for a burnt offering?" Abraham said, "God will provide for himself the lamb for a burnt offering, my son." So they went both of them together. When they came to the place of which God had told him, Abraham built the altar there and laid the wood in order, and bound Isaac his son, and laid him on the altar on top of the wood. Then Abraham reached out his hand and took the knife to slaughter his son. But the angel of the Lord called to him from heaven and said, "Abraham, Abraham." And he said, "Here I am." He said, "Do not lay your hand on the boy or do anything to him, for now I know that you fear God, seeing you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me." And Abraham lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, behind him was a ram, caught in a thicket by his horns. And Abraham went and took the ram and offered it up as a burnt offering instead of his son. So Abraham called the name of that place, "The Lord will provide." As it is said to this day, "On the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." And the angel of the Lord called to Abraham a second time from heaven and said, "By myself I have sworn, declares the Lord, because you have done this and have not withheld your son, your only son, I will surely bless you, and I will surely multiply your offspring as the stars of heaven and as the sand that is on the seashore. And your offspring shall possess the gate of his enemies. And in your offspring shall all the nations of the earth be blessed, because you have obeyed my voice." So Abraham returned to his young men, and they arose and went together to Beersheba. And Abraham lived at Beersheba. Okay. So I know a lot of us, we've read that story before, and we know that story, but I know some may have not. So I like to start off and go over it. So let's talk about Jehovah Jireh, the Lord will provide. So that key verse, Genesis 22 and 14. "And Abraham called the name of that place Jehovah Jireh, as it is said to this day, in the mount of the Lord it shall be provided." Jehovah Jireh is one of the most beloved names of God, but is often misunderstood. Many hear Jehovah Jireh and immediately think of financial blessings or material provision. And I have to say, a lot of times I do too. I think most of us do that, just without thinking. When we hear Jehovah Jireh or we think that we have a need, our first thought is a financial need. But God certainly provides for our physical needs. But the first appearance of this name reveals something much deeper. Jehovah Jireh is not simply the God who gives us what we want. He is the God who sees every need before we do and provides exactly what is necessary to accomplish his purpose in our life. The name is revealed on a mountain of surrender, sacrifice, and obedience, not prosperity. So when we think about Jehovah Jireh, we do want him to provide for us financially, but there is so much more to him than just the finances part. And I know I have seen him move financially for me time and time again, but I've also seen him move in other ways. I think a lot of us have. So number one, Jehovah Jireh is revealed in the middle of a test. Genesis 22 and 1, after these things, God tested Abraham. The first mention of Jehovah Jireh begins with a test. How many of us have been through a test before? Notice what the text does not say. God did not tempt Abraham. God did not punish Abraham. God tested Abraham. Throughout Scripture, God often reveals himself through seasons of testing. Israel learned Jehovah Rapha after bitter waters. So when they were in Egypt and they came out of that, they had to go through that testing. And even in the wilderness, he provided that manna for them. They had to go through that testing. And Gideon discovered Jehovah Shalom in fear because he was called a mighty warrior, but God called him that in the middle of hiding when he was fearful because God was calling him that. And he said, but I am the least of these. And so God found him in that place and called him mighty warrior. And Abraham learned Jehovah Jireh on Mount Moriah. So if we just think about that test, I could only imagine if God called me to sacrifice something like that. You know, sometimes it's hard for us to sacrifice the little things and to go through that test, but for what he went through. Many believers pray for greater revelation while trying to avoid every trial. We don't like going through hard things. I don't. I don't. I know me and Tammy were talking right before I got started, and she told me, she said, Danielle, I was thinking last night at the sisterhood, she said, I was just thinking about all of the things that you have been through and how much your life has changed now. And it's so true. It's so true. But I had gone through many tests to get where I am now. But it's not easy. And not everybody wants to. I don't think anybody wants to. I can't say anybody wants to. We do anyways. You know. So why the test? Isaac represented everything. He represented God's promise to Abraham. It represented Abraham's future, his legacy, and Abraham's greatest earthly love. And I was thinking about that, and I know I had my boys when I was really, really young, and my life had been a mess, and I knew all the wrong ways that love was. I never knew what the right way to love was, but I knew all the wrong ways. Life had taught me that, But when I had my boys, it's like it changed my life forever. Even though I was young, even though I was inexperienced and I knew nothing and I was nowhere I needed to be, when I had my son, I knew what love was because I just knew it. When I saw him, when I had him, I just knew it. I was like, this is what love is, that love of a child. So think about that, this test, that he was everything to Abraham. And God was asking Abraham whether he loved the promise more than the promiser. Sometimes God tests what we treasure, not because he needs information, but because we do. So the tests, they aren't for him, they're for us. God may allow a test to expose where our trust truly rests. And so that is so true because I know when we talk about faith, I always think about faith, and you really don't know where your faith is until it's tested. We don't know where our heart really is until it's tested. And he knows where our heart is. He always knows where our heart is. So it's not for us, those tests. It's not for him, it's for us to show ourselves where we are really at. So number 2, Jehovah Jireh means the Lord will see. The Hebrew word Jireh comes from the verb raha, meaning to see, to perceive, to inspect, and to foresee. In Hebrew thought, seeing and provided are closely connected. If a shepherd saw a sheep wandering, he acted. If a father saw a child's hunger, he responded. To see implied responsibility. So Jehovah Jireh literally carries the idea, the Lord sees, therefore the Lord provides. God never discovers our needs. He never says, I didn't know that was coming. He already sees tomorrow while we struggle through today. This changes prayer. Instead of informing God, we trust God already knows. And Jesus reinforces this in Matthew 6:8. Your Father knows what you need before you ask him. Prayer is not giving God information. Prayer is expressing dependence. And that's so true because I know I was speaking to somebody a while back about a prayer request, and they said, there's nothing left that I can do. I don't know what else to do. And have y'all been there before? Because I have been there before. I've been there. My car is my quiet place sometimes. It's my worship place, if I have that quiet time and driving. And there's one time I was driving down the road, and I think I was just tired, and I was fed up, and I was like, God, there is nothing else I can do. And it might have been a financial situation. I really don't remember. But I was like, there's nothing else I can do, because I was always the type, if I can take care of it, I'm not going to ask anybody. I'm going to do everything that I can do to get this done until I get to that point where I'm like, there's nothing else I can do. I have no more thoughts of what to do. I can't make this happen. I can't do this. I can't do anything. I was like, I'm just going to have to give it to you, God, because I can't do anything. And I heard him tell me, good. Now I can do what I want to do when you take your hands off of it. And that's the hard place we have to learn, because we want to put our hands on it, And but he's the one who sees everything that we need before we even know we need it. And I love that, because I think about that in my own life, and I think about my marriage, and it's funny because I know we want to pray specifically for the people that we want, and that's good. We need to pray for a godly man. If you're single, you need to pray for a godly man. You need to pray for a man that has character and things like this. But I often question praying so specifically about, well, I want him to have brown hair and blue eyes and be like this and this and this, because I'm going to tell you something. When I met Josh, I probably would have never really talked to him much. He was not my, we all have that type, and I just never really thought about it much. But there was something that always drawed him to me, and later on it was funny because he started talking to me, and I was like, the Lord knew I needed him more than I even knew myself, because I don't know sometimes what I want. How many of y'all are in here like, we really don't know what we want? And it's not just a woman thing. It's not, But we think we know what we want. We really do. We think we know, and we think we have that idea. That's what it is. We have an idea in our head that I want it to be this way. Or even if he might share something with us. I don't know if you have that gift where God talks to you sometimes and he'll tell you something coming. But there's been times, I had to learn that, to take my hands off of things, because there's times that the Lord will tell me something, and I had to learn that I can't make an idea of what it's going to be, because he has his way. And if I even try at all to imagine what it is, I'm way off. Because he has something so far greater than I could even imagine, that I just need to take my thoughts and my will out of it, because he knows more than we know. And I love my husband, and he's so good to me, and he's so loving to me. And God knew I needed him when I didn't even know that I needed anybody. I was like, I don't need nobody. And God was like, yes, you do. I was like, okay. Okay, so number 3, God's provision is found on the path of obedience. Abraham's journey lasted 3 days. Think about every opportunity Abraham had to quit. He could have turned around, delayed, negotiated, or rationalized. Instead, he obeyed. Notice the sequence. God spoke, Abraham walked, Isaac climbed, the altar was built, the wood was arranged, Isaac was bound, the knife was lifted, and then God provided. So imagine all of that 3 days he's going through all of this thinking. I couldn't imagine what he was thinking. Miss Martha would be great at telling this story. I know she has those great thoughts of what they're thinking inside their head. If you weren't at the ladies' meeting last night, you missed it for sure. But I couldn't imagine what he was thinking. But whenever I was reading this and talking about the sequence of things, God spoke. Abraham walked it out. He took that first step. He heard him. And sometimes that's just where we've got to be in obedience, is just when he tells us something, be quick to walk it out. And sometimes we don't know why, but just that walking it out. And then Isaac climbed, and the altar was built. And when I was thinking about that, I was thinking about what I had talked about last time, rebuilding the altar, and how when you build the altar, you're building it off of your past tests, your past victories, the past things that you've been through. So I wonder if Abraham had that faith where he was building that altar and he's thinking, I know you've done these things before. I know who you are, and I know what you've done, and I know you're going to make a way. I don't know how. Even in this process right now, I'm building this altar. I'm getting ready to do this. But I wonder if he still had that faith. You know how hard that'd be? Really, to even make it to that point of sacrifice. So that he went through all of the motions, even to the point where that knife was lifted. And he was fixing to do it. And then God provided right in the middle of that test. probably right at the hardest part. I can imagine that would be the hardest part. So right at the hardest part, God provided. The ram did not appear at the beginning. It appeared at the point of complete surrender. Many people ask, where is God's provision? A better question may be, am I standing where God told me to stand? Provision often waits where obedience leads. God doesn't bless disobedience simply because we ask sincerely. Okay. So number 4, Jehovah Jireh points beyond Abraham to Jesus Christ. Everything in Genesis 22 foreshadows the gospel. Consider the parallels. Abraham offers his beloved son. The Father offers his beloved son. Isaac carries the wood. Jesus carries the cross. Isaac willingly submits. Jesus willingly submits. Both ascend Mount Moriah's region. And what was the major difference? Isaac was spared and Jesus was not. The ram substituted for Isaac. Jesus became our substitute. This is why Jehovah Jireh ultimately points us to Calvary. The greatest provision God has ever made was not financial, not physical healing, not success. It was reconciliation through Christ. Romans 8:32 says, "He who did not spare his own son, how will he not also graciously give us all things?" Every other provision flows from the greatest provision, the cross. And how true is that? How true is that? That if in, I know I said it, and I think Miss Martha, you were talking about it yesterday too, the Old Testament. And I really do love the Old Testament, and I know that's weird, a lot of people don't, but the stories and the ways that he has tried through time just to represent what he wants for us. Even in the story of Abraham and his sacrifice and everything that he had to go through, God foresaw all the way. If we remember what we learned before, that there was no time in God. He sees way before this time here. So even in this situation right here, he was thinking way before the time of Jesus for us. And that's what he wanted for us. Is it all right tonight? I hope so. I feel like I'm going too fast. I really am. I'm trying not to go too fast. So number 5, God's provision is often already prepared. Genesis says, Abraham looked up and saw a ram caught in a thicket. The text never says the ram suddenly appeared. God had already arranged it. Abraham simply saw it when the time was right. What if God's answer already exists? What if he has already positioned the opportunity, the relationship, the wisdom, the breakthrough, the strength, and we're simply not able to recognize it yet? Sometimes God changes our circumstances. Other times, he changes our perspective. And when I was reading this, I was thinking about that. God had already arranged it. And it's just so hard to think, to wrap our minds around who God really is, that he knows so much beforehand in each and every single one of our lives, that he has it planned out and we can never see it. It's just amazing to me. And when I read that, I thought, I don't want to share way too much about myself because I never want to make things about me. But I thought about it, and I thought about my life and the things that I've been through when I was reading all of this, because really he has been Jehovah Jireh for my whole life. Whether it was financial or whatever it was that I needed, he has been that for me. And there was a really hard time that I went through where I was married before, and my ex-husband, he was a drug addict, and he was on drugs. And, I prayed, and it was a test, and I prayed and prayed. And when I came out of it, I ended up having to get divorced because he wouldn't come off drugs, and it became a very dangerous thing for me, and he really almost killed me. And so I had to come out of that situation, and I questioned, we question God. Like, I prayed, and I know what you can do, and sometimes we don't understand, and I never could understand in that moment. But there was a time, I think I might have been at a conference at another church, and I was praying, and I was thinking about how a couple of years ago I had been praying for my husband to come off drugs. And I thought, well, why didn't you do that? And then I thought about the time frame of my husband now, Josh. I thought about the time frame of when he was going through his issues. And I hope he doesn't mind that I shared, but he had addiction. He had problems with addiction too. And so the time that I was praying for my husband, he was going through that too. And the Lord showed me later that he was the one that I was praying for, and I couldn't see it. I couldn't see it because I thought that it was the one right in front of me that I was praying for. But God knew in the end how that situation would turn out, way before I ever knew how that situation would turn out. And so it came to that point where we met right straight in the middle of both of our circumstances, where God could have only arranged that we needed each other so much in both of our situations, not just mine, but his as well. And he showed me that even though I thought that I was praying for one, I was praying for the other. And so even still, he answered my prayers when I didn't even realize it, And so that's what we just can't fathom the plan that he has and the things that he is working in the background in our lives. It's just amazing to me. And sometimes it's hard in the middle of that test that we have to go through because we don't see it in the middle. We only see it when we come out on the other end. But sometimes God changes our circumstances, and sometimes he changes our perspective. And that's really good because sometimes our circumstances will change and sometimes they won't. And sometimes it is our perspective that needed to change in it, But faith will lift our eyes, and fear will keep them on the altar. So faith will keep us looking to what God has. We know, like if we think about Abraham and he was lifting that knife, I can just imagine that he was lifting his eyes to God thinking, all right, God, this is it. This is it. You got to do something. I'm going to be obedient and do what you've told me to do. But here's the point in the middle of this test. And he's lifting his eyes and trying to keep that faith. And if he would have had fear, he would have been still stuck on that. He could have been stuck on the altar, stuck, before that in disobedience. We talked a lot about obedience and sacrifice for the altar. Number 6. We'll move on to number 6. Jehovah Jireh provides according to God's purpose. Many people misunderstand Philippians 4:19. My God shall supply all your needs. Needs are defined by God's purposes, not merely our preferences. God did not provide Abraham another son. He provided a sacrifice. God didn't remove the mountain. He met Abraham on it. Throughout Scripture, God provides differently for different people. Israel received the manna. Elijah received ravens, the widow received multiplied oil, and Peter found a coin in a fish's mouth. And I don't know if everybody knows those stories, but Israel, when they had come out of Egypt and they were hungry, they were asking God, they were like, did you bring us out of freedom just to be hungry, complaining like, yeah, okay, we're free now, but I'm hungry. What are you going to do about it, And so he provided manna for them. And Elijah, in the middle of the famine, God provided ravens to bring him food and feed him. Different ways. It was the very same situation, but he provided it in different ways. And the widow received multiplied oil. If we know that story, she was at that point where she had nothing, and Elijah had come to her and asked for food. And she said, all I have left is enough for me and my son, is the point that she was at. But she sacrificed anyway. She was prepared, and she gave that to Elijah. She said, okay, I will give you this, what I have. And then after that, he had told her to go borrow and find every vessel that she could that could be filled with oil. And then in the end, it was filled with oil, and she sold that and had plenty of money, to do those things that she needed to do to feed herself, to feed her son. So these are all good stories of in the Old Testament of where they were in a test and they obeyed and God was faithful. So different methods, but the same provider. And that would only make sense. How many of us in here have kids? Okay. So, I know sometimes I've heard people say, you're supposed to treat all your kids the same, but in all honesty, our kids aren't the same people. So why would you treat them all the same? I know my boys are very different from Chaselyn. Chaselyn's a little more high-strung and sassy. She takes a little different handling than my boys did. But even in both of my boys, my oldest and my middle son, they were very different. My oldest son was very calm, very to himself, and there was different things that they liked. My oldest, we connected with coffee. He likes coffee, so we would go drink coffee together. In different things like that. So it would only make sense that God would treat us differently, but the same, just like a parent. And again, it doesn't make any sense, but it does, because that's how God is. The way that he is, it doesn't make sense to our minds sometimes, but it does make sense, because he loves each and every one of us, just like we are his children. And so he wants to provide for us each in a way that will reach each and every one of us. Because what's going to talk to me is not going to talk to somebody else the way that it would someone else. So it's the same God, and in the end, he will provide. It's just different methods for different people in the situation that they need. And we should never confuse God's method with God's faithfulness. God may change his methods, but he never changes his character. Never changes his character. And so number 7. Jehovah-Jireh invites us to live by faith. Before Abraham ever reached the mountain, he told his servants, "We will worship and we will return." That statement wasn't optimism, it was faith. Hebrews 11 explains, Abraham believed God could even raise Isaac from the dead. Faith doesn't pretend problems don't exist. Faith believes God's promise is greater than the problem. Jehovah-Jireh teaches us that provision isn't always visible before obedience. Sometimes God asks us to walk before we understand, to trust before we see, and to surrender before we receive. Faith says, if God called me here, he already knows what I'll need. So is that true to anybody here tonight? That we have walked through and had that faith even when it's hard. We've had to be in that situation and speak out, what it is that we have faith for. It's not always easy, is it, Miss Martha? It's not easy. It's not. But in obedience, he has his opportunity. He has his opportunity to show out in a way that we could not even think or imagine. And I hope that's just what we get tonight, is to think about that even through the hard tests, no matter what it is, because everybody's test is different. I know everybody in here has probably had something in their life that was a test. And in the middle of it, you've had to have faith, and you've had to hold strong, and you've had to wait and see what God had to do, or what he had to do for this situation, or has to do for this situation. Some of us may still be in the middle of it right now, but in that obedience, he wants to show us that he is Jehovah Jireh, the Lord that sees it, the Lord that knows it, and the Lord that's going to provide it in any way that he wants to, that we may not even think or imagine. And I think that's one of the biggest things, is to get out of our mindsets, because we all have our own certain thought, our own certain way of how we think that God's going to do it. Most of the time when we think provision, we think finances. If we go back to the beginning, we think about finances. And I know there were times and times and times that I know God's provided for me financially, but there's been times that he's just given me what I needed, whether it was physical, or if we get away from thinking the physical, just the things that I needed spiritually. Maybe it was a friend that I needed in my life. Maybe it was a marriage that I needed in my life. Maybe it was a church that I needed in my life. And so let's think, get out of our mindsets and not think just financially that he will provide, because he has an eye that sees above everything in our whole life, from the past to the current to the future. And he has a plan that is just working out each and everything in between. So we have faith in that plan. And the Lord will see. He sees everything. He sees what we need. He will provide. I'm going over the big points again. God's provision is found on the path of obedience, so we have to be obedient. So we got to get away from our mindset, not think always financial. We know that he is the Lord that sees, and he wants to provide. God's provision is found on the path of obedience. We have to do something. We have to do something. And I think we've talked a lot about that here lately, that it is, our faith is activated within a step. Faith isn't faith unless it's tested in some way. And we can pray, but sometimes he's asking us to do something. And we have to do something, whatever that may be. From the simplest thing to the biggest thing in our life. And if we get to the point where we can wake up every day and just talk to the Lord, talk to the Lord. I think about times where there was one time I was driving down the road, and I just heard the Lord say, I was going to Food City, and he was like, don't go to that Food City. Go to this Food City. And I'm like, but why, Lord? I was like, that Food City's right here, and that one's way over there. Do y'all have conversations like that? I hope you do. I hope you do, because you can have daily conversations with the Lord just like that. You really can. And so I was having that conversation, like, why? I complained a little. I was like, this Food City is closer. I was like, oh, okay. So I went on down to the other Food City, and I'd like to tell you some big, awesome story about what happened, but nothing happened. I got my groceries and I went home, but I think about that, but who knows what would have happened? I don't know. He knows. He knows why he asked me to do that. I don't know why he asked me to do that. But if we get to that point where we listen and be obedient, he is working those things out for us in a situation we may not even know about. So we just have to listen and be obedient. Because he already has, number 5 was, he already has prepared what we needed, and we didn't even know it. And I love that story. I know it's my own personal story, but I do just think about that so much in my life. Me and Tammy were talking about it. Just think about that, about how Josh was so much what I needed, because I had been through some tests and some tests and some tests and some more tests until my testing was tested and it was done. I think I was to that point, and I told her, I was like, it's like you have to learn to live again. Has anybody ever been through so much and just tested so much that God brings you out of it and you're like, oh, I have to learn how to live like this because it's peaceful. I'm loved, and it's a whole new world that God has for us whenever we're obedient and we listen to Him. And we may have to learn to live again and laugh again and, all of those things, because He knows, even through all those things that we went through, there was a plan and there was a purpose. And I know I'm still going through things, not in a testing way, I don't think, but in a growing way. That He brought me through all of those things in life to this point to where we're growing. I'm growing, He's growing, we're all growing together. And that's the plan that He had that we couldn't even see, And so that's just amazing. He already has prepared what we need if we'll just be obedient. And all of this is for His purpose. God has a purpose for our lives. We may want things, we may need things, but His provision is for us to walk out His plan for our life, for what He has for us to do. It's not just about us, if we think about it. Even if we go back and we think about the stories of Israel and Elijah, and when he fed Elijah from the ravens, he needed that in that moment just to live, but God still had so much more for him to do. So even if he didn't ask for it, God was going to provide for him because He still had a plan and a purpose for his life. And just if we think about that, He still has a plan and He still has a purpose. So He wants to provide for you. That way you can move forward in what He has for your life and walk it out. And just live by faith. It's hard. It's hard. I like to stand up here and say it's easy. And sometimes I feel like, when you get so deep into the Lord, sometimes people make it look easy. And sometimes we look at people and we're like, oh, I wish I had faith like that. And I know the prayer team, we always think about Miss Martha. That's why I keep talking about her. It's like, Miss Martha, I wish I had faith like Miss Martha. She just makes it look so easy. Like when she gets to praying, you should hear her. She's just like, It's like, I wish I could pray like that. I wish I had that. You think things like that. But really, it's just living it out in faith. And faith isn't easy for anybody. It gets easier with each and every step that you take in obedience. And that's where we get to. It's just obedience in that. But I don't want to linger any longer than what I have. And that's all that He had. So I hope that we got to learn Jehovah Jireh, the provider. Do I have any 90s kids in here? I'm not going to sing for you. You know what I'm talking about, don't you, though? I thought that song came to my head. I was like, I'm not going to sing it. I'm not going to do it. But I was thinking that's the first thing that comes when I hear Jehovah Jireh. It makes me think of that song. So just know the Lord will provide, because He sees it, and He sees each and every one of us. And so I love you guys. Men's breakfast is Saturday. Church picnic Saturday at 6:30. Yes, if it rains at all, it will be canceled. So if it rains at all Saturday, it'll be canceled. So just watch Facebook for that. And just to make sure that we still have it.